Today I'm going to show you what's inside of this Nissan QR25 engine and how it works. This engine is out of a 04 Nissan Sentra Spec V, which means it made 175-ish horsepower, and this was back in my high school days when racers were actually really cool. Now this one also came with a 6-speed manual, limited slip differential. Teardown on that coming soon. This was before the days of the CVT when Nissan was actually pretty cool. Now this engine was nothing fancy. It was basically an Altima engine in a Sentra body. This one had electrical issues, as you can tell by the new alternator, with 240,000 kilometers on it. So I'm going to start this teardown on the more controversial side, which is this intake manifold. I got to remove some brackets first. Now this has a upper intake manifold and a lower intake manifold. It is a metal design, which is cool. Couple of coolant hoses going to this new looking throttle body. This is one of the first generations of drive-by-wire throttle body on this car. These clamps look a little too rusty for me to deal with, so I'm going to make a business decision here and carefully execute them. There's one more line over here. Alright, I'm going to pull this off now. Alright, this line goes down to what looks like a vacuum pump. I just execute that very nicely. And now remove this top half here. Take a look at how clean that throttle body is. Brand new. Now back in 04, carbon buildup was not a thing. The intakes are actually very clean in here. But what was the issue were these butterfly valves. Now in the intake we have this vacuum diaphragm here, and that goes down to the vacuum pump at the bottom. And you'll see at lower RPM it's there for promoting mixing. But at higher RPM this is going to activate and give you maximum airflow. Now the problem was these are held in by little tiny screws, and they would come loose, get sucked down into the engine and destroy the engine. That was a very common thing on these engines. I guess the fix would be to put some Loctite on there. This one's got all 8 of them on there still. Next up I'm going to remove some more wiring harness. You just love it when I get fully dressed engines. Alright, got another business decision here. I'm just going to take off this clip here. Everything's so rusty. I've been spoiled by late model engines recently. I'll just move that power steering hose out of the way. Well, would you look at that? This is port fuel injection only, and it has its own sub harness here where I can just disconnect the fuel injectors and possibly not have to deal with the fuel rail. The fuel rail just connects to the fuel line, which goes towards the tank over here. You know, in some newer cars, the direct injection sits on top of the valve cover. You gotta take apart the whole fuel system. That little bracket holding that vacuum pump looking thing at the bottom here. Now I should be able to get all the 12s off in the head, remove the intake manifold. The little vacuum pump thing over there that sits underneath. This looks more like a canister. Just crusted off this valve over here. That was probably a vacuum switching valve to control pressure in here. That ultimately controls this diaphragm and these flaps. Now let's see if we can remove this intake in peace. Yes. And you can see it comes with the fuel line and the fuel injectors over here. Moreover, if you look in the engine, it's absolutely clean. And that's because the fuel injectors are sitting right here inside of the airstream going into the engine. Life was so much simpler 20 years ago, wasn't it? Check out the play on this butterfly valve. These screws are loose, and this is what would come apart and go into the engine. Let's look at the top of the engine now and get these coils off of here. Just freeing up the valve cover now. Looks like there's 2 10s here for ground. These grounds look a little homemade to me, don't they? And these only had variable valve timing on the intake side. So I'll just remove the 1 oil solenoid on that. Later versions you'll note actually have 3 solenoids for only 2 variable valve timing actuators. You guys remember when you had to look into the owner's manual to see what the oil weight was? That was for people who could read. Alright, let's pop off the ignition coils here. Alright, let's zip off some valve cover bolts now. See what we're dealing with. Whoa, that's clean. I mean, you gotta hate on anyone for putting a plastic valve cover, but at least it feels pretty sturdy and stiff. But look at the condition of this engine. Now, it does have a remanufactured sticker from 2006, but I'm impressed for 240,000 kilometers and 20 years old. This thing is almost brand new in here. There's no tarnishing, which definitely tells the person changed their oil. All right, let's come around to the front side of the engine here. I'm gonna remove this new looking alternator. Pop this guy. Oh, my toe. Let's get this dirty looking power steering pump off here. This was still back when they used hydraulic power steering. Honestly, for things that have changed from mechanical to electrical, I feel like EPS was actually a good move. Now as for the water pump, I don't know what kind of decision this was, but these holes don't line up with any of the 3 bolts that bolted onto this housing over here. Maybe I can get it from this way. Oh, there comes the green coolant. Peel off this water pump. Look at that. All metal impellers, metal housing, steel pulley. You don't find that nowadays. They're cheaping out with plastic. Let's get this tensioner off here. This might be reverse threaded. Let's see. Get the actual tensioner off here. Oh, this is so light. I had a heck of a time loosening this crank bolt before putting it on the stand. Move that crank. They don't make these out of metal anymore. Most of these are plastic. All right, now I'm going to remove all the timing cover bolts. These are all 10s. I'm going to use my timing cover removal tool here. It's nice that they have a 2-piece cover, because you can check timing without doing a whole lot down at the bottom. And you'll see this timing cover includes the variable valve timing solenoid, which is oil controlled. Glad I removed that because there's a bunch more bolts inside of here for the timing cover. Alright, now it's time to see if we left any bolts free with our timing cover removal tool. So that just happened. Timing cover broke in half. I'd say before, this is a really bad design because you got a very small thin area in the middle here, and there's some pegs here that are rusted on, so it's pretty easy for this thing to just crack right off. Alright, so given that, I believe there's probably some bolts inside the oil pan, so we'll save this to when we turn the engine over. Let's get all these other accessories off first. Now the cooling system on this engine is a little bit like those old Hondas where they have the cross pipe going across right underneath the manifold, and that goes around to the back side to where we have the coolant control center. I'll go ahead and remove this from the block. Oh, look, there's the thermostat housing. By the way, the thermostat housing is made of metal, unlike a lot of new cars today that make them out of plastic. Let's take a look at the thermostat itself. Oh my god. I did not expect coolant to be in there because the water pump was empty. Take this off. Looks like we got a ripped O-ring, and seems like someone tried to silicone around it. Again, this is a good old mechanical thermostat before they moved on to those coolant control centers that they had. Back over here, let's get this pipe off. By the way, this is a block heater where you plug in your car's cooling system, so it keeps it warm in today's cold winters, like today. Let's get this water pump housing off here. Wow! It's a 12mm bolt. Does not need to be that tight. Oh crap. Here's the water pump housing. It's interesting that it's replaceable in case it ever needs to be. It's not part of the block itself, it just plugs into the block over here. Look at that big old rusty pipe. Nowadays they use plastic for that. But by using a rusty pipe against aluminum, they tend to get stuck. I wonder if it'll come out. Imagine trying to do that in the car. Look at the corrosion. Alternator bracket, those are 14s. So speaking of the exhaust, some of the Altimas and Sentras had a problem with the exhaust sucking in catalytic converter material, because the catalytic converter would break up, then it would suck it back in when there's a slight vacuum, and that would damage up the engine because the piston's moving up and down, eating out catalytic stuff. This feels like taking apart a Honda or a Toyota. It's got 12s, 14s, and 10s. It's not that stupid 13 stuff that Nissan's using nowadays. This is the coolant manifold. Now in newer cars, this is a big giant piece of plastic with electric motors on it. In this one, this is just a junction of the upper radiator hose and the heater core inlet, as well as a temperature sensor. Very simple. Bolts right to the head. Take off this coolant manifold. Oh, and disconnect this. So simple, eh? Back in the day. Now metal is good for the cooling systems, better than plastic, but when it's rusty like this, you could probably develop leaks. That is crazy. Look what I found. There's actually another thermostat that lives on the head here. Yeah, so this engine actually has 2 thermostats. One on the head and one on the block at the front here. So we made it back around to the intake side. I just got to remove this engine harness here. There's just the cam position sensor. I'm just going to cut that off. And we're going to do an executive decision on the NOx sensor here. And we'll just pull that out. And now we've got some engine harness to sell. Now at the bottom here we do have a bracket of some sort. This is a 14. Then we've also got this bracket that has a CV shaft inside of here. Thanks to the power steering link, everything's loose at the bottom here. 17 on this side. Doesn't even look like a structural bracket, it's just for a wire harness. It's so big. That's for the CV axle. If you own any front wheel drive car, you know that this bracket always likes to get the CV axle stuck in here, and you can never get it out. So make sure you anti-seize these up before you put in new axles. Alright, so now that we got all the hard parts off the engine, let's turn it upside down so we can tackle the oil pan and make a mess. Next I'm going to remove this stamped steel oil pan. You can see it is beginning to rust off here. That is the issue with these oil pans when they get a little bit older. Although at least it's not made of plastic. Okay, I got my oil pan removal tool here. We'll go ahead and use that. This has been resealed before. Very clean inside. No sparkles, no issues mechanically. I'm going to take off this oil pickup next. Nice and clean on the inside there. Now, Nissan didn't cheap out on this. They put in balance shafts on a little 2.5 engine to reduce vibrations, and that's what this big mechanism is. So next I'm going to remove the 12mm that hold this upper oil pan to the lower part of the block. Alright, let's see if we can remove this oil filter. It's a Fram oil filter, which we all love and hate. Whoa, that's really dark in there. We've got our upper oil pan removal tool here. And these 2 bolts here. Oh, I missed another 12 there. Oh, this one comes with the oil stick. At least this one has an oil stick. Inside of here, nothing interesting. We just have a baffle, and these are the two in and out lines going to the oil filter. Alright, so now that we got that oil pan off, these two are the bolt holes that were holding this timing cover in. A lot easier when you get all the bolts out so you don't break the timing cover like I did. Ta-da! Now this one's got the oil pump mixed inside here. So the oil pump is driven off of the crankshaft directly. We've got our inlet coming from the oil pickup tube. Then we've got our inlet and outlet going to and from the oil filter, and then travels into the block over here. I don't typically like this design because there's a lot of potentials for oil to leak internally, causing a loss of oil pressure. Here's a little oil pump driver. It's got that little squared off on the outside. With the engine back up right, here's a look at the timing chain setup on this QR25 engine. We've got our crankshaft over here, and we've got our secondary chain that goes down to the balance shaft, which has to be tensioned, so that it's got its dedicated tensioner over here. Remember, the oil pump is driven off directly from the crankshaft. Now moving further up, you can see we've got our timing chain slides and our timing chain tensioner for our main chain that goes to our intake and exhaust camshafts respectively. Just going to give these cams a little ugga-dugga. Now let's grab the timing chain tensioner. These are 210s. Timing chain tensioners were not really the strongest part on the QR25, especially the early ones. This one's very simple. It's got a spring with a plunger, and it's hydraulically powered at the back here. Alright, let's get this timing chain slide off. Ooh, might as well take these off as well. Alright, now let's get these slides off. Look at that, nice and hefty. Looking at these timing chain slides, now the first one here is made of plastic, but it's very hefty. You can see it's very thick, not like that thin crap that you'd see in newer cars today. It's also got a metal wear point inside of here, so as that tensioner is pressing up on it, it doesn't wear out and eat into the plastic. There's not much wear on these tensioners as well. This one here is backed with steel. You see, back in the day, timing chain issues were not really a thing because they used stronger components. Now let's see if this timing chain tensioner, let's see if it's going to snap on me. Nope. Here's the chain. It's actually a double row chain, not a single one like your bicycle. And now we've got our VVT gears. This is the intake side. Pull that off. Now if you want to know more about how variable valve timing works, I got a video linked above. Now if you want to know more about how gears work, go back to high school physics. So now that the timing's done, we can take a look at the top of the engine here where we have these cam caps. This engine was from simpler times where you didn't have roller or rocker arms. These cams just push directly down on buckets that push down on the valves. There's no extra pieces in here, it's very simple. Just remove this headpiece here. For variable valve timing, there's an extra hole here that brings oil up into here. That goes into this track over here, which is what's going to feed that VVT gear through this track in the camshaft and the head. Alright, let's take off all these cam caps. Cam caps are actually in decent shape. There's not too much wear on them. Remove the intake camshaft. Hello? Are you stuck? There we go. Alright, taking a look at the bearing surfaces. There's a little bit of lines, but very, very minuscule amount. Get the exhaust side off as well. Same thing here, these are very small lines of wear. Alright, head bolts on these are a regular old 10mm hex. No fancy spline or anything like that. And let's get this cam sensor out of the way. Cam sensors were known to cause issues on these engines as well. Extended cranks, no starts because of these. Check this out, good old port injection. All the pistons don't have too much carbon built up on the top of them. By comparison, here's a modern GM piston, it's all carbed up. But the interesting thing is, look at that bowl shape on top of there and clearance for the valves. This engine has none of that, it's very flat and simple. But what this engine did have is a coolant leak, and they put that stop leak crap inside of here, and it really gunked up the engine. I wonder really what happened to the radiator and the rest of the cooling system on this guy. That's pretty bad. Let's pull off that head gasket. So the more I look at it, maybe this thing had a head gasket failure in between cylinders 2 and 3. Look at the stop leak inside of the holes of the head gasket that's supposed to take coolant. Furthermore, check out the stop leak in the head. It's all gumming up the pores where the coolant's supposed to be. Look at that. Anyways, looking at the combustion chamber, it looks very standard for a higher mileage engine. It has a slight dome shape to it. But because there's no direct injection, there's no overcarbon. Now my bet is this thing probably had a head gasket leak and was burning coolant. They probably put some stop leak inside of there to stop it from burning that coolant. But the real reason why it was burning coolant was because of this design right here. This, my friend, is a slit that goes between these cylinders to help cool off either side while exchanging coolant over, because you don't want a hot spot in between here. I'm shocked to see that Nissan was using this design from way back in the day, because Ford and Honda have now started using this design. I've had huge problems with head gaskets. The reason is you got a very thin slit over here, which means a very small sealing surface, and you're relying on the pressure of that head gasket to keep that coolant out of the combustion chamber. However, you can see in this case, it looks like that head gasket was breached. Maybe some coolant was getting burned into each combustion chamber, or maybe the combustion chambers themselves were losing compression into the cooling system, causing that leak somewhere. Now, if you check out my EcoBoost or my Honda L15 video, you'll see that this is also a very common problem on those burn through head gaskets. And because those are turbocharged engines, it makes it even worse, and a lot more labor to do a head gasket job than on one of these simpler engines. I tell you, I'm a little disappointed, because design-wise, everything looked great until you got to this slit and this coolant crap inside of here. I thought this engine was pretty much a good one. So with the engine back on the bottom, I'm going to go ahead and break these bolts that are holding this balancer loose. Take off this timing sub. This timing chain tensioner is not hydraulic. I can actually push this in, and it's a ratcheting design. The ratcheting teeth are down inside of here, which is great because the main tensioner is not even a ratcheting design. I prefer these because it kind of locks it in once it's set to tension. Before I do that, let me zip this guy off. Now we should be able to take this off. Double rolled, triple rolled actually. Now I should be able to pry up and get this balancer assembly off. I wonder if people just run without this just to save a little bit of weight and rotating mass. Alright, connecting rod cap bolts are 12.10 millimeter. Connecting rod bearings look okay. There are some lines indicating some wear, but that's just nothing normal for any high mileage engine. Now I'm going to pop the pistons out. Now taking a look at the piston design. Now of course we saw the top is flat compared to a modern 3.6 GM engine, but the rings are really what stand out. Take a look at the GM one, you'll see the rings are very thin, and the oil control ring is also very thin. These are lower tension oil rings so that there's less friction going down, but look at these old school ones. You can see they're much thicker, and you'll see that the corrugation between the oil control rings is a lot bigger, and they don't get clogged up compared to this, which is already clogged up and it has half the mileage. Not gonna lie, oil burning was an issue on these QR25s, but this particular one looks whistle clean inside of it, and you could tell by under the head how clean this thing was. There's not really much tarnish inside this engine. Now having a big oil control ring like this, which is nice and clean, is going to allow the piston to scrape the wall and bring the oil back in through these little return holes here, where it can return underneath the piston into the sump, as opposed to going on top of the piston and burning oil like a lot of modern engines do real quickly. The main cap bolts are E-Torx 14, and then there's a bunch of 14s going all the way around. Now going all the way around, we got some 12s. We'll remove these bolts. Now, one thing I do like is that they've used an entire bed pan with a ladder frame design as part of the main caps. Most four-cylinder engines will actually use separate main caps and then have that upper oil pan on top. So this is actually like a three-piece design. So not knowing this, I put my engine stand bolt into that upper oil pan there, so I'm just going to take this off. It'll hold, don't worry. I got my upper oil pan removal tool here to see if we missed any bolts. Nice ladder frame design, pretty sturdy. Now as far as this piece, the only oil passage comes from underneath here, from the oil pump, goes straight up into the block here. Other than that, this is just mechanically functional. I'll remove this rear main seal here. And as expected, the main bearings are in good shape, except for this one, which looks like it's got some wear on it, but nothing major. Now that main oil galley is going to run along the length of the block here, and that's where your connecting rod and crankshaft bearings get their oil from as they're drilled into it. However, if you notice, there's no oil sprayers inside of here to help cool and lubricate the cylinder walls. And that's because there's this little nozzle over here on the back side of the connecting rod bearing that's going to take some of that oil pressure and spray the cylinder wall with oil. Bit of a cheaper way of doing things, but hey, it worked because these engines did last a while. See, they capped off the back of that oil galley with a proper bolt and not some pressed in or part of the rear main seal that could leak. And at the front of the head, you can see they tee off at the top here to go lubricate the engine with oil for here. And this one also taps off of the main oil galley here as well. And at the bottom of the head here, you'll see where that oil comes in here and here. And then it's eventually going to make its way to these two holes here, where it's going to go into the camshaft to lubricate all of these bearings. And then of course this hole over here to feed the variable valve timing gear that sits out here. Check out how clean the back of those valves are. You're never going to get it that clean on a direct injected engine. Alright, I'm going to open up this balance shaft assembly. Guys, I just lost my 10mm socket and I'm kind of depressed right now, so I'm going to have to hunt all over and find it. I'm going to use my 1/2 inch drive one for now. My oil pan removal tool here. Let's take a look and see. Oh, it's kind of nasty. So these have bearings as well, and you can see that the half moon balance is on one side because it has to counterbalance the force coming from the crankshaft on the other side. So the way this works is they're opposite to each other. You've got half moons on each shaft, and they both work together like this, and they go on the opposite side like this to counteract the vibration coming from the engine. Of course, this has to be timed with the engine itself. Now these do have bearing surfaces inside of here. They look pretty clean, although the oil that's in here does look pretty well used up. And that's a look at this old school QR25 engine. Now I think the bones of it was actually a really good design. It goes back to ways how things used to be very simple 25 years ago. Now with the exception of the questionable cooling system, I think this was actually a pretty robust design, especially thinking about how simple things are back then compared to 20 years later. Make sure you guys stay tuned for the transmission teardown from this car, because that's got a limited slip differential inside, and subscribe if you want to see more videos just like this one.